first question. Right? The first question came from a devotee in India who was curious about why that when he sees the real thing, he gets aroused. For example, in the case of a man, he sees a naked woman, a real life naked woman, so he gets aroused. And then when he sees a picture of a naked woman, he also gets aroused. His question is basically, why do we get aroused by pictures when we normally like to be aroused by the real thing, the physical object in front of us? So the question is, when a man sees exciting object in front, for example, a naked woman, man is aroused, right? So sexually aroused. Yet, when man sees a printed picture of the naked woman, he is still aroused, even though the printed picture is not the real thing. I'll just expand this screen a little. Yeah. Even though the printed picture is not the real thing. So he considered the real thing as the real naked woman right in front of him. So he's curious why that when we see a picture, we get equally aroused. So the question is, surely one gets aroused only by seeing the real thing in the physical world? Well, the interesting answer to this question is nothing is real. All is an illusion. And I'm going to explain that in a moment. Right? So this is basically the question that why do we get aroused by printed picture? Right? Even though the printed picture is not so-called the real thing. Right? So the question here is, one gets aroused only by seeing the real thing in physical world. Well, one gets aroused easily by anything one sees, whether it is a printed picture, whether it is a movie, whether it is a computer image, or whether it's the real person right in front, the real naked woman in front. So this is really requiring an answer from an experiential perspective. So let's think of it from an experiential point of view, that all is an experience, right? Instead of trying to make everything existential, right? There's a physical object, there is an eyeball, so on. There is an experience involved. So let's dig into this question. How are we going to deal with this question? Basically, there are two things we need to consider: perception and reaction. So the question actually was touching on two things: perception and reaction, right? So those are the two parts of this experience: the experience of seeing the object, whether it's a real person in front or it's an image or a picture, printed picture. So that experience of seeing is perception. Then there is this experience of emotions, the arousal and the reaction. Emotion is a broad thing. It's not just one thing. A lot of people think emotion is how we feel. You know? Basically, it's not just in the mind or the heart. It's actually involving the whole body. So this is the experience of emotions. Being aroused, the body gets excited, and then the mind gets disturbed. So that is the emotions part. And then we begin to react in terms of getting excited or lusting or hating something we don't like. So these are the two aspects that we have to deal with. Right? So first we look at the perception part. Right? What we perceive is never the real thing, but only a mental image of the real thing. In other words, when we perceive something, it's really just a mental image arising in the mind. Right? So in both cases, whether we see the physical object in front, the naked woman right in front of us, so-called the real thing, or we see a printed picture of that same object, that means a printed picture of the naked woman, we are not perceiving the real thing. In other words, whatever object we're looking at, It is not that object that is entering our eyes, creating the perception. The perception is not created by the object. A lot of people think, oh, this object produced a perception. No, that is not correct. We perceive a mental image of whatever it is in front of us in both cases. Therefore, this mental image arising, that is really, in a way, you could call this an illusion. Right? An illusion is when you have an image of what you think you are perceiving. So let's look at the experience of seeing. Experience arises dependent on the presence of necessary conditions. So for the sake of keeping this wholesome, I'm not going to put a naked woman there. I'll just put a dog in place of a naked woman. So let's take the example of someone seeing a dog. So the experience of seeing the dog. Experience arises dependent on the presence of necessary conditions. So in other words, certain conditions have to be met in order for us to experience something. So in this case, to be able to see the dog, first, there must be light, right? Well, the dog has to be there. The person, of course, has to be looking at the dog, but there must be light. Light is a necessary condition to help us see. Without light, we can't see. So in other words, if it is completely pitch dark, we cannot see anything. Right? True or not? If it is completely pitch dark, if you walk into a room that is completely pitch dark, you can see nothing inside. So therefore, you need light. If someone turns on the light, then you can see what's going on inside the room. In the same way, with that dog in front of us, and there is light, then light is reflected from the dog and enters into the eyes. Enters into the eyes. So therefore, the eye is picking up reflected light. So the reflected light enters the eye and stimulates the light-sensitive cells inside the eyeball, at the back of the eyeball called the retina, where there's a lot of light-sensitive cells, optic cells. They are being stimulated by light entering, and that triggers impulses being fed to the brain, because that's how this sense organ of eyeball works. The impulses sent to the brain produce the mental image. So therefore, light has to enter and stimulate the eyeball, the back of the eyeball, and you are paying attention, then you become aware. With that, there is this process of perception. The Pali term for that is panchakanda, the 5 aggregates. It produces a mental image, the rupa. So very importantly, realize that the word rupa means the appearance of the object in your mind. Rupa very often is mistakenly translated as the object out there. You know, looking at the dog is the rupa. No. Or the form of the dog is the rupa. No. Rupa is really not the form. Rupa is really the appearance arising in your mind of the mental image of what was perceived by the eye. So the sense organ picked up the light, transmitting the impulses to the brain. The process of perception produced this mental image arising in your mind. So now you are aware that there is a dog, or rather you're aware you've seen the dog. Having seen the dog, this is perception arising. Vijnana, Chakku Vijnana. This is the perception of the dog. Now, vijnana is often translated as consciousness, but actually when it comes to the 5 senses, the vijnana of the 5 senses is really the perception, right? The sense organ perception. So in this case, Chakku Vijnana is the eye perception. Now, the mental image arises, and the mind works in very interesting way. It projects the notion, the concept that, oh, there is a dog out there. Because that's what the mind produces. The mind projecting this concept. The mind creates the concept. The concept of this object is out there, identified as a dog out there. So this rupa arising, we identify it as a dog, the nama. And it is out there. It's the world out there, the loka. So this is really the experience of seeing. So we can only call this an experience. And this experience produces a knowledge, produces an awareness. Now there is a knowledge of having seen the dog. So this is called Dharma. Now in this case, this word Dharma has many meanings. One of the meaning, of course, it's used to refer to the Buddha Dharma. But in this case, it's referring to the awareness of an object called a dog out there, and that awareness. Now, when such an awareness arises, such an experience arises, the mind works in very strange way again. It breaks that experience into two parts, right? So when this experience arises, the mind thinks, I see a dog out there, right? That's what the mind is aware of. I see a dog out there. And interestingly, that is where the mind breaks this experience into two parts. Right? First, this breaking of experience into two parts is called the dichotomy of experience. There is an objective experience, which is the perception of the dog, and there is a subjective experience. So the perception of the dog out there, that is the objective experience. But at the same time, you are aware, and there is a notion that I am aware, I see, and that is the subjective experience. So the subjective experience becomes the atta, the self. The objective experience becomes the world, loka. So this self is I see, so therefore I see a dog out there. And that's the dichotomy of that experience. The I see is subjective, out there is the objective. Now, looking at this, therefore you can see whether it is a real dog out there or it is actually just a picture of a dog out there, it is still the same experience, that there is a mental image arising of the image of a dog. So that experience is broken into the two parts, right? So nothing you see is real. Nothing you see is real by the time you become aware of it, because it becomes a mental image, it becomes a perception, and you begin to interpret it and add meaning to it. So let's move on from there. You see, when a naked woman stands in front of you, what your mind perceives is not the naked woman, but the mental image caused by light reflected from the body of the naked woman. Just like what I showed you, the light reflected from the dog. So therefore the mind becomes aware, and that because of this mental image arising. So we are not actually seeing the real thing. We are seeing light reflected from the body of the object, light reflected from the body of the naked woman. In the same way, when you see a printed picture of the naked woman, what your mind perceives is the mental image caused by light reflected from the print picture entering your eyes. So in other words, you become aware, right, with this mental image arising, right? And that arises because light is reflected from the printed picture entering the eyes. You are not seeing the printed picture, just as you're not seeing the naked woman. You're seeing light reflected from the naked woman. Now, if there was something blocking the light entering your eyes, can you see the naked woman? Even though he's standing in front of you? If somebody puts a blindfold in front of you, are you able to see the naked woman? No. You see? So you're not really seeing the naked woman. You're seeing light reflected by the naked woman. If there's any interference to that light, you will not be able to see. In the same way, you're seeing light reflected from the print picture, and if there's any interference, you can't actually see the print picture. So whether it is a printed picture or whether it is the real thing, so to speak, all you're seeing is light reflected from the object entering the eyes. That's what you're seeing. And this is called recognition. And this process is the process of perception, the panchakanda, producing this mental image, the rupa, arising in your mind of the perceived object. This perceived object is the objective experience. And the mind, the mind is made of three parts. The Buddha has described the mind with three words. Vijnana is one word, so that is the perception arising. Mano is another word, that is the cognitive process. Now, what the cognitive process does is that when this mental image arises, it searches through your memory, and this is very fast, categorized memory of past experiences, past fluid experiences. I say fluid because that past experience, the memory of past experience is constantly changing. Nothing is static. In your mind, your memory of anything is constantly evolving or changing or transitioning. So nothing remains static, even your memory. Everything is fluid, constantly changing, right? So this is really what's happening. And and it looks for a categorized match. In other words, it's not looking for a specific match. At first, it is looking for a categorized match, meaning that it starts to compare with your memory of all the past naked women that's been seen, and then you begin to recognize, oh, it's a naked woman. The same thing, whatever object that is presented to you, you interpret it in a categorized manner, the category it belongs to. Like, for example, I'll show you this, right? This is a mouse. Well, those of you who have not seen me speak in public, in person, right, you would probably have never seen this mouse before. And yet, when you look at this, you know it's a mouse. Why? Because you have seen hundreds of mouse before, or mice, computer mouse. You have seen hundreds of them in the past. So you have a memory of the category of mouse, categorized memory of computer mouse. So when you see this, straight away you can tell, oh, this is a computer mouse. Because you have a memory, a categorized memory of all the mouse in the world. You have not seen this particular one. And now that you've seen it a couple of times, you know this is a mouse. Now I'll show you another one. How about this one? I think many of you would not have seen this one because this is my private mouse that I use at home. I don't take it out of the house. So none of you would have ever seen this mouse before. And yet, what is this? You know it's a mouse because your mind stores memory in a categorized manner. So therefore, you remember things by category first. Sorry. It's when you go further that you begin to identify specifically, oh, this is a red mouse, this is a blue mouse, this is Billy Tan's mouse, or this naked woman is Jenny, this naked woman is Mary, this naked woman is Elizabeth, and so on. So you begin to identify later on, but initially the first match is a category. And this is really what's going on. The same way when you see a picture, the same thing arises in your mind. So awareness of a perceived object is the vijnana. And if it is the eye awareness, eye perception, chakku vijnana, okay? And if it is the ear hearing something, then you have the ear awareness, then that becomes a sota vijnana, so on, okay? So awareness is this. So the Buddha used three words to describe the mind: vijnana, mano, and then the third word is chitta. I'll come to chitta in a moment. So when you begin to identify the object, you give it a name, you give it a label. You call it a computer mouse, you call it a dog, you call it a naked woman. So you've given it a name, nama, to the image in your mind, rupa. And therefore, this identification of the object is the nama rupa. So let's look at a flow chart. That process of experience of seeing, experience is a chain reaction. So when things happen out there in the environment, it stimulates our sense organs. And then the vijnana arises because of the five aggregate, the panchakanda. Now you have a vijnana of what was seen in terms of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And to put it all together, there is the mano, okay? So when you see an object like that, a mental image arises in your mind. Ah, there is a dog. You see the dog. And that mental image arises. That's the rupa. Then to put it all together, the cognitive process is the mano. It begins to refer to categorize memory of past experiences, fluid past, and tries to find a match. And when it finds a match, this process of looking for a match is really the process of identification called papancha. Right? So papancha is really identifying the perception and then categorizing it and giving it a label, creating a concept out of it. And this concept is the recognition. This is the process of cognition. You have this recognition of that dog. And this is the concept the mind now creates. The concept of an entity identified as dog out there. So that label, dog, is the Dhamma. So now the mind has created this concept that you have now seen that dog. Whether you see the real dog or a picture of the dog, the concept is the same. I see the dog. Of course, when you go deeper into the detail, then you see, I see the picture of the dog. Okay, so concept is basically identifying what has been perceived by your sense organ. Right? So now the Buddha used 3 words to describe the mind. Then the mind is not a static thing. It is really a process of experience. So there are 3 parts of this mental experience called the mind. First, the word vijnana refers to the perception. And this perception arises because of the panchakanda. It is the awareness of what was perceived through the sense organs. And then the second part of the mental experience is mano, the cognitive process, which produces cognition and conception. Cognition is when it is able to identify, categorize identification of the perceived image. And the perceived image is rupa. The process of categorized identification is called papancha. And this identification occurs by assigning a name or a label to the perception. And the name or the label is called nama. Now, a lot of Western translator has mistranslated nama and rupa because they call rupa as the object or the form, and they call nama as the mentality. No. In Sanskrit, in Sinhalese, in Pali, in the real meaning of Pali words, and in Eastern languages derived from Sanskrit, like Malay, Bahasa Malaysia. In Malaysia, we know that. The word rupa means appearance. The word nama means name or label. You give a name or a label to something. My nama is Billy, because that's my name. So the word nama means name. The word rupa means appearance, not form, not object, appearance. And where is this appearance? In the mind, right? So that is really what nama, rupa is referring to, the appearance in the mind, and then a label is given. That is cognition. And with that cognition, cognizing the experience, now that experience is called Dhamma. Now you have experience seeing, and that is the Dhamma of seeing. Then you have concept of what you have seen. And with concept, it leads to choices. Because when you have a concept of something, you begin to choose what do you want to do with it. If it is something that arouses and makes you feel good, then you might want to choose to do something to get it. Or if it makes you upset, unhappy with it, you might want to get rid of it. So it produces choices in your mind. And dealing with these choices is the chitta. So the chitta is really the affective process of mind, which leads to mood and temperament. Now, these are the translations I'm explaining based on what I have studied and learned from Bhante Punnaji, and also from my own research of how the mind works from neuroscience. All this makes sense. They are very consistent with the findings of neuroscience, how the neuroscience has described the mind having three parts of the experience, exactly the way the Buddha described it. So chitta is the affective process, which leads to mood and temperament. Mood is how you feel about something. Mood. So in other words, if it's something that makes you feel good, then it puts you in a good mood. If it's something that you don't like, it puts you in a bad mood. You see, mood is how you feel about it, whether you like it, you don't like it, right? So the liking is dependent on your own past experience. And it's also temperament. Temperament is the urge to react, wanting to react. So in other words, there is this urge to react, the emotional reaction. An emotional reaction is the tanha, to feeling. The Vedana is the feeling arising from the cognition, and that leads to mood and temperament, right? So leads to whether you feel good or you don't feel good, and the urge to react. So in the case of a young man, single young man who has no girlfriend, for instance, the moment he sees a naked woman for the first time publicly, and he gets very excited. So that excitement is his reaction. His reaction, his sexual reaction, and he gets excited and he feels aroused, and he goes into this strange aroused mood, right? Mood of arousal, and then there's an urge. Now he might go crazy. He wants to do something. So that urge to do something is the temperament. All this leads to our emotional states. That means, are we excited? Are we lustful? Are we hateful? Depending on what we experience. And at the same time, whatever it is that we experience, we begin to personalize it and say, I feel it, I like it, right? And that process of personalizing is called upadana. That is personalizing the experience, which leads to the notion of a self-centered existence. And this is the notion of bhava tanha. That's why for people who are not enlightened, we are constantly thinking we exist. Now, this upadana is this personalizing the experience. Let me give you an example. Like just now, when you see a dog, what arises in your mind? I see a dog. What's the first word? I, you see? Self-centered. If you were in the shopping mall, walking around the shopping mall, and suddenly you see your good friend in the distance, your best friend happened to go to the same mall, and you see him in the distance walking towards you, what arises in your mind? I see my best friend coming, you know? What's the first word? I. So we personalize it, and that's what makes us very self-centered, because every experience, we have a tendency to personalize it and say, I feel it, I like it, I don't like it. Every experience, right? So this is really how the mind works, with these three parts of the mind. And therefore, the young man who sees a naked woman, this is his reaction. His reaction is tanha. Tanha can be lust, tanha can be anger or hatred, and tanha can be delusion of self-centered existence, right? So his reaction is the tanha. So I hope that is clear. I try to keep it simple. I don't want to go so too deep into it, because I could go on this previous page here. This here, I could actually go very deep in, but I'm not going to go that way, because it'll take too long to try to go deeper into this. But this is really a nutshell what's happening. Now let's look at it graphically, a flow chart, how it all works. Things happening out there, external stimulus stimulate our sense organs, and then we become aware of something. Now we get aroused because of perception, and in this case, let's say perception of threat or conflict, and then we get anger arising. The most common the most common reaction, the most popular reaction of anything that we experience is anger and hatred towards any perception of threat or conflict, because we interpret it as something threatening or something that is a conflict, and that arouses the emotion, right? We could also interpret it as something to be very lustful, something that arouses our sexual desires, right? And therefore, our sexual emotions are aroused also. So when emotions are aroused, there is a part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala gets triggered and creates a chain reaction of hormones flooding the body, and then the body begins to feel some discomfort. So it is the bodily discomfort that is being felt, and that is the fight or flight reaction in the body. Whether it is something lustful or something hateful, they are very similar bodily reaction. Hormones are being released and the body begins to change, organs begin to react, heart beat faster, breathing deepens, and blood pressure rises, right? So whether you see something exciting or something hateful, your blood pressure will rise, right? Right? Young man seeing a beautiful naked woman, his blood pressure rises, goes through the roof. Let's say a very strict religious person who does not agree with people going naked and suddenly sees a naked woman, he would also experience some blood pressure rising because of anger and hatred towards what he has just seen. So all these are reactions in the body, and that causes our habitual emotional reactions if we are not mindful. And this is the mental disturbance now. Up to that point, it was a physiological disturbance. Now it's a mental disturbance. And then we begin to experience either greed, anger, hatred, fear, worry, anxiety, jealousy, conceit, shame, and so on. These are all emotional reactions. Now, if we're not careful, this emotional reaction get out of control, and then we begin to personalize it, cling on to it, and it actually feeding these emotions with our imagination, memory, and expectations. Then the mind begins to proliferate, mental proliferation, and this makes our reaction even worse, right? So this part where the body changes, this is the stress reaction. And this part where we begin to react, this is our emotional chain reaction. So I hope this has explained now, right, the perception, whether it is a picture or it is the real thing. You see, if you see, let's say if people who love certain foods, let's say a pizza lover, he sees pictures of pizza restaurant, he also gets excited. Oh, this pizza restaurant, they have this pizza. Oh, I like that pizza. But it's all pictures. Sometimes it's only words, right? Different types of pizza being described and the person gets excited. So whether it is seeing the actual thing or seeing what is printed on a piece of paper or seeing what appears on a computer screen or a handphone screen, you still can get aroused, right? Because the mind interprets and reacts. So, oh, this is a bit out. Never mind. Don't worry about that bottom part. Okay, the Buddha actually called this emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. Right? I'm sorry about the font getting out because I moved it to another computer to display, and unfortunately I didn't check it properly. Okay, never mind. I'll read it out. Emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. That means when emotion arises, it dominates us. It controls us. If we are not mindful, if we don't tame the emotion, it dominates us. Emotion creates distress. Distress is mental suffering. We begin to feel mental anxiety or whatever. And emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. So if we don't tame our mind, we will be controlled by emotions, and emotions will dominate us, and we will be spellbound by emotions, and we will react in emotional way. That's really what the Buddha was trying to warn us. Okay, so it's really emotions doing all that. And These three parts of the mental experience would explain that. Right? So these choices, how can we overcome this? How can we tame our mind? Well, we cannot stop seeing something if it is right in front of us, right? If some naked woman walks past in front of us, we can't stop seeing it. It's there. Our eyes are open. Classic example, let's say I'm driving. I come to the traffic light and it's red, so I stop in front of the traffic light. Then I see pedestrian crossing the traffic, crossing in front. And suddenly a naked woman walks in front of my car, crosses. And then I get aroused, right? As a man, you get aroused. Whether you're young or old, the man would still get aroused by a naked woman. And maybe a woman will also get aroused in the opposite way. Maybe some women become angry seeing other naked women walking around. So therefore, the arousal can either be lust or hatred. In the case of a young man, most likely it is lust. In the case of a very strict religious person, then it might be anger or hatred. And whatever it is, we can't stop the happening up to that point, but what we can do is the choices we make. How do we respond to what happens? We cannot always stop what happens. Nobody can stop the coronavirus pandemic. Not one person, not the smartest scientist in the world can stop the coronavirus pandemic. But we have choices. What are some of the choices? When we go out on the street, we wear masks. We keep social distancing. We use sanitizer to prevent getting infected, right, as much as possible. So we do these things. We have choices to respond to what we experience. We can't always control what we experience, but we can actually control our responses. So therefore, it's choosing wholesome, helpful, peaceful, harmonious thoughts when we experience something that arouses our emotions. Right? And that, okay, go back to that. This choosing happens in the thinking mind, the mano. The mano chooses. Because if you don't use your thinking mind to choose, then the emotion will choose for you. And emotions will make you react emotionally. So in the case of a young man seeing a naked woman, if he does not use his thinking mind to choose what to do, sitting in the car and then see this naked woman walking across, the man get excited, he might honk and look and then get distracted. And when the light turns green, he doesn't even know and all that. So he's allowing emotions to take control. So therefore, we got to use our thinking mind to take control of our responses. So now we can transform a vicious cycle of emotion into virtuous cycle of composure. So when things happen out there, okay, it produces some perception of threat or conflict or lust or hatred or whatever, and emotions are aroused, the body feeling uncomfortable. Normally, what we can do is change the way we interpret the circumstances. Instead of the young man thinking, oh, this naked woman going by, I'm getting so excited. I want to go and hug her. I want to go and hold her. I want to get to know her. Change your interpretation to perception of peace and harmony. And by doing that, you can then cultivate emotional composure. Your emotions become tamed. Your emotion become more composed, and your mind becomes more settled and calm and tranquil. And then your body will feel comfortable. Your body won't get excited by all the hormones being released. And with that, you're now able to think how you want to respond. So the first thing is to arrest your arousal by simply relaxing. And then having purposeful, wholesome response using the process of think, T-H-I-N-K, that it is truthful, helpful, improving the situation for you, or it is necessary, or it's kind. And then you will cultivate wellness, comfort, peace, and happiness. So this is really how to solve that problem of emotional arousal. Learn to relax and then think. So you're using your thinking mind. You're no longer allowing your emotions to take control. You're no longer spellbound by your emotions, like Buddha, what the Buddha warned us about. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. I'm not trying to go so deep. I want to answer the question that was posted. Right? So if we don't do that, this is what happens: self-affliction of mental suffering. And the Buddha warned us that whatever harm one enemy may do to another, or one hater to another, it is our ill-directed emotions that inflict upon ourselves a greater harm. That means it's the way our emotions are directed. When we are aware of arousal and we allow and we do something about it, choosing wholesome thoughts, then we are not allowing the emotions to go out of control. But if we allow emotions to go out of control and spellbound and control us, then we go into mental proliferation, right? And therefore, imagination, memory, expectation arise and take control of us. We become under the spell of our emotional excitement. So I hope that answers the first question. All right. Now, if you have any further question to my explanation, please feel free to post it, then I will respond to it. If it is something straightforward, I can respond to it later. If it is something a bit more complicated, I will prepare a proper response in the next Q&A forum. Okay. So this is the end of that first question.